Paul Roos here from Performance by Design, and welcome to the Culture Couch and my partner in crime, Gerard Murphy.
Hey, Rosie, how are you?
G'day, Murph. It's good to be sitting next to you.
It is, very nice.
Now, today's a little bit different because a mate of mine, Joe Garley, runs Brilliant Women Global, and we're doing today's Culture Couch in conjunction. And we've got two of our guests today, Janine Kirk, who's the patron, and Ana Marinkovic, who is on the advisory board. And I think it's one of those topics, Murph, that, I mean, we talk a lot about culture and leadership and behaviours and things like that, but I'm really looking forward to delving into what is inclusion and diversity. But first, Janine, I might throw to you because you've got an amazing business background as well. Tell us a little bit about that, and then Anna, I'll throw to you as well. So give us a perspective on what you've done from a business point of view, and then we'll really start to delve into some of those concepts.
Thanks, Paul. Well, I suppose if I explain what I've done, you'll realise that I have no idea. I had no plan for a career whatsoever. In fact, I remember attending a management seminar when they gave us a blank piece of paper, and this is when I was very young, and they said, I want you to map out what you're going to be doing in the next 10 years. And about an hour later, they came to check, and mine was still blank. And everyone else was writing away. And they said, why is yours still blank? Because I said, I don't know what's out there. There could be so many possibilities. It's so exciting, the opportunities. I don't even know how to start. Apart from the fact that I did a double major in economics, which is probably why I had no idea what career I wanted to do. But it did allow me to go into business. So I think as a graduate trainee, I went into a company, an organisation called Australian Consolidated Industries, ACI, which people who are a bit older would probably remember, good things come in glass and all that sort of thing. It was a multinational packaging company. Went overseas for a couple of years, travelled around the world, had a great time, worked for a bit overseas as well. Came back and went into, when I say politics, I was a staff member of a minister, in fact, the Minister for Foreign Affairs at the time, and at the federal level, naturally, and then came back and worked for a major company or organisation in manufacturing, and then went in to be a public servant for a period of time in the industry department. Went on from that and became the CEO of the Committee for Melbourne, which was the first time I was a sort of CEO. That was the start of my leadership career. After working with the Committee for Melbourne, which some people may recall is an organisation that was set up to bring in organisations from around the city, academic organisations, so universities, business, the not-for-profit, the charity sector, to say how could we make Melbourne a better place. And bearing in mind this was in the 80s, and Melbourne was considered the rust bucket of Australia, and now we're just considered the pandemic centre of Australia. But we have improved tremendously since that time. And then after that, I was asked to go in and be a partner at Ernst & Young to set up their government and public service practice, which I did, and spent quite a few years there. And then as I was retiring from Ernst & Young, I was asked whether I'd be interested to set up a new charity. And the charity happened to be that representing His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, which I did, and set that up and ran that for 6 years. And now I've stepped down from full-time employment, but I am chairing something called Phoenix Australia, which is the Australian Centre for Post-Traumatic Mental Health. So that's a very quick overview of a sort of a 40-year career, so I apologise for that being a bit long.
Some great concepts, particularly at the moment with the post-traumatic stress.
Yes.
That's going to be something that's interesting as we move forward too, not just for the people you deal with, but generally speaking. Anna, just, for you.
Sure. And I think just sitting here and listening to Janine, I think this is the beauty about living in Australia, that someone like me who was a refugee from the Balkan Wars, who was smuggled out of the country at the age of 12 without my parents and came here virtually on my own, literally with nothing, is today sitting next to someone like Janine Kirk and sharing a similar stage. Well, I was as I said, very fortunate to have had an opportunity to grow up in Australia and to be educated here. And I utilised all of the opportunities that this great country gives to migrants. Like myself, I studied very hard and ended up doing a double degree at Melbourne University. I thought that I would follow in the footsteps of my family overseas and go into diplomacy. And I had a short stint at the United Nations and then ended up coming back home to Melbourne. And my first job was on ANZ's graduate program. And over the next 15 or so years, I had these most incredible opportunities where I was given new roles and ability to deliver real transformational change in the way that banks offer products and services to their valued customers. I got an opportunity to work on some of the most innovative technology projects. I had an opportunity to bring contactless payments to Australia. I ran the biggest transformation program in banking at the time. And today I feel very, very privileged that National Australia Bank has given me an opportunity to lead Australia's largest small business bank, especially through this period, which is rather unprecedented. We look after 400,000 small businesses as they start, sustain, grow, and ultimately wind down their businesses. So it's an enormous privilege, but also a huge responsibility as well.
And you're really at the heart of what's happening at the moment. I mean,
Absolutely.
small, medium businesses and what's been happening with the pandemic. So I'm really looking forward to chatting about that. But perhaps, Janine, Brilliant Women Global, give us a bit of an insight into what that does, and we'll really delve into that concept of inclusion and diversity.
Well, you've just said it entirely. It is about inclusion and diversity and recognising that both those characteristics are so important for the future of this country. We're a great multicultural country, and we've just heard an extraordinary story of Mana, how she started her life here and what she's achieved. And there's so many stories like that. There are countless stories. So I think the idea of the organisation is to ensure that we continue to put the message out there that that inclusion and diversity is a crucial aspect of what we need our culture to be, both externally in terms of the world we live in Australia, but also within a business context as well. Everything we do needs to draw on the creativity and the positive aspects that both those things give us. And that's the beauty of it. I'm a great believer that creativity is going to be the wellspring by which we actually pull ourselves out of this. I love the words that everyone uses now, that everyone's pivoted. Which is great. And my organisation, Phoenix Australia, has done exactly that. Training programs that we would normally deliver face-to-face are now online, and so many organisations have done that. So I think it's fantastic that people are starting to look at how do we actually deliver our product, our service better in the future, because we want this to be a better normal, not just going back to the right normal. It's about a better normal when we come out of this. Because what's the point of all this, if you like, suffering that so many people are going through, unless we actually, as a society, as a culture, and as businesses, actually come out better, with a better approach to things and a can-do attitude. And I think one of the things that I've been witnessing is people are just saying, let's forget about, in a sense, the politics. What do we need to do? How are we going to do it? How do we bring the resources in to actually achieve an outcome? And how do we do it quickly and do it so that we get the results we need? And that's exciting, and it's a pity it's taken a pandemic to actually do that. But let's take advantage of that, because if we are going to come out of this in a better than when we went into it, then that's what we're going to need to do. We're going to need to draw on the diversity. We're going to need to draw on and including people, because that's where you get the wonderful creative spark that actually brings in ideas that perhaps you might have not even considered before, and bringing them together and really giving opportunity to people to be the best they can possibly be. And that's going to be for the betterment of all of us.
And how do you go about improving inclusion and giving us more diversity?
I think, Anna, you're more in a better position working in a large organisation, because that's where culture can be stuck, isn't it? That it's very hard to turn around a large organisation.
Often people use these terms, don't they? And we hear them all the time, particularly politicians. But how do we actually make society more inclusive? How do we make
and also seeing what is the definition of diversity? Because often it is related to male-female paradigms. Yet we know that our society is diverse across so many different aspects. And what you will often see in large white-collar organisations is that the leadership teams and the boards and management teams do not necessarily represent the diversity of their customer base. And I do think that that is a missed opportunity, because we do not live in a culturally homogenous society. So we do need to be able to understand and relate to different views and different cultural aspects as well. And we know that data tells us that the companies that are able to tap into that effectively are the ones that actually end up with better financial outcomes as well. But I also think it comes back to that leadership piece as well, because as a leader, you do need to act out your words and your intentions. And I think that our current CEO, for example, at NAB is doing a wonderful job in that he's tackling diversity, not just from a male-female paradigm, but also bringing in different, diverse, global experiences and outlooks. And I think that will serve the organisation well.
I think it's a really good concept, isn't it? Because most people, when they talk about diversity, think male, female sort of thing. We've got to get more women in or more men in. But it's a really, really good point that I want to explore, because diversity, and you touched on what your customers are made up of. And we talk about high-performing teams, and I suppose those simple concepts around how do you get the best team, well, surely you must pull in people from different areas. And that really is what we're talking about in diversity. Janine, how have you seen it change over the years?
Look, I think it's interesting. Maybe it's human nature when you're interviewing someone for a role and say, oh, I really like that person, I'm getting on with that person. And if you actually stop and look at that person, you probably see a reflection of yourself.
Yeah.
Precisely.
So how do we change the mindset of saying, let's ask some different questions. Let's get them to speaking more. Let's see what they can contribute to the discussion. And actually, it's good to feel uncomfortable sometimes. It actually doesn't do you any harm from time to time to feel uncomfortable. And it is about talent. And the issue is, how do you judge talent? Well, if you've got blinkers on, you're not going to be judging talent. If you're only pitching to a particular section of the community, if you're selling your service or product, you're missing out on a whole group of other people. They're in a different parallel universe sort of thing. So it's the ability to open your mind and challenge yourself about, are my preconceptions, even the way I've been brought up, is that actually limiting my ability to make good decisions around the talent of people and what they could add value to this organisation about? How can they use their skills to add value? So I think it's hard, because you actually have to take a deliberate decision, and you have to, the more you do it, you train yourself to be better at it. But I think sometimes people are so busy, they're just, quickly, I've got to make a decision, I'm going to do this. And so you just get stuck in that rut of acting and behaving and looking at things the same way you always have.
Yeah, we spoke earlier to the CEO of Bunnings, and one of the interesting things that he spoke about during the COVID period was reflecting on unconscious bias and how he's made a really conscious effort to stop, think,
and train yourself.
And make sure that the decisions we make aren't just based on what we've done before.
But the word you said there, unconscious bias, unless you're actually aware that there is a thing called unconscious bias, you just behave the same way. So it's really people, and I don't know whether you call them enlightened, but we have a lot of information around now that we never had 10, 15 years ago about this whole issue. And I think those who have the empathy and the sensitivity to recognise that it is about inclusion and it is about diversity of thought, opinion, appearance, all those factors, gender, whatever they might be, that you actually recognise that you have had conscious bias, even though it's titled unconscious bias.
And on that, I mean, you get a chance to work in a huge company, but work with small, medium business. How are we as a country? Like, how are we with inclusion and diversity? Because I suppose part of solving any problem, Janine, is understanding where you're at any one time. Are we good at identifying where we are from the 0 to 10 in terms of inclusion and diversity? Where do you think we are?
You see, I have a bit of a global
Yeah.
outlook on this because I've travelled extensively. I've spent significant amount of time overseas, and I have family and friends all around the world by virtue of everything that's happened in the Balkans. So I can with confidence say that Australia would be the best country in terms of how we're dealing with this. Whilst we on the inside, we see this even better opportunity for us to utilise the richness of this cultural diversity that we have in the country. When we compare ourselves to other first world countries, I think that we would be scoring better on virtually every one of those scorecards. Just one thing to add to what Janine was saying previously is around what I found really important was around how do we instill a sense of confidence as well on the people that do not necessarily fit all of the stereotypes to raise their hand, to have the confidence, to have the conversation, to lean in, as Cheryl Sandberg says. So that's the other part of this equation. We have to get that right as well. And when I reflect about the number of young females from migrant, ethnic or lower socioeconomic backgrounds that I have mentored and given them those opportunities, they themselves wouldn't have raised their hands without a lot of that encouragement and support. So there is that piece around as well. How do we nurture a sense of confidence in these people?
Yeah, it's one of the things we talk about it all the time. The capacity for the leader to create a safe environment.
Yes.
The psychological safety for people to feel okay to speak up. And it's, again, really difficult to do.
And how you respond when they do speak up.
Yeah,
100%.
Is really important. I mean, I worked for a CEO many years ago who was absolutely brilliant, and he took the organisation into new areas. But he had, as we all do, none of us always right at everything, but he had a terrible trait of dressing down people in front of others.
Yeah.
And I used to watch this and feel very uncomfortable for those people. And I remember we had a brainstorming session, and there was a consultant and a number of the senior staff were in there. And the idea is you just come up with any ideas, because a brainstorming session doesn't matter how silly they are, because it may just help somebody else come up with another idea. And the CEO walked into this the session, sat down, somebody said something, and he turned around to them and said, "That is the most stupid idea I've ever heard." And of course, it completely shut down the session. I could see the consultant's face just fall, because there was no coming back from this. And I thought to myself at that time, if you encourage people to share ideas, to say different things, to think laterally, to really get some great ideas happening, what richness and diversity you get, as opposed to having somebody who completely shuts down discussions because they're coming from their viewpoint and aren't prepared to have an open mind to think about what sort of ideas could actually happen. And so for me, that was a really good example. And I love watching people in terms of their styles. And I just looked around the room and I thought, that's a great lesson to learn at my young age, what you don't do to actually encourage people to feel in a safe environment, to share their ideas and create a bit of magic.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because, Anna, you've been very, kind's not the right word, but to Australia and saying how good we are, but clearly we've still got a way to go. So what are the main areas where we can get better at as a country, business, et cetera, in this whole discussion? Either of you?
Yeah, I think that by virtue of Australia being isolated and at the end of the world, we have a pretty unique culture, and in many ways we are just protected from the harsh realities of life that the rest of the world needs to deal with. And when I have reflected on the way in which small businesses have been dealing with this unprecedented pandemic and crisis, I was struck by the fact that in Australia we've had 3 decades of uninterrupted growth.
Yeah.
Which is really such a unique.
It is. It's absolutely
It's a very unique situation. And speaking to a large number of small businesses over the last few months, you realise that resilience and preparedness for these black swan events is not necessarily front of mind. And I think that this pandemic will definitely change that. But it did come to that something like this, of this scale and this impact, had to happen for us to kind of think about potentially being a little bit more conservative and thinking ahead and, bolstering up those balance sheets to ensure that we can withstand shocks if and when they come again.
And do you think that's part of, it's interesting because I've been fortunate, I know you have, Murph, I think part of travelling is a really good way to understand how fortunate we are, but not only how fortunate we are, how hard other people got it. Do you think potentially, I know we are great travellers, but there is a lot of people that don't often leave Australia. And through that very nature of being protected in this really cool environment, we start to whinge about high taxes and, the road's blocked or whatever. You go to some of the countries, and I don't have to tell you, Anna, do you think that's a real barrier as well for Australia to have a more resilient approach at different times?
There is definitely something there about resilience. And by virtue of, and I was just saying to Janine before this interview, when I compare my childhood and my experiences versus how my children are growing up, they are having very comfortable and very, very safe and secure childhood. But I do worry about their level of resilience, about their mental health and their mental well-being going forward, because when everything is given to you, when you've got an incredible social security and you've got a system that catches those that perhaps are in need, and when the system does that consistently, I do feel that resilience tends to be something that
So how do we teach resilience, not only to our children but to our staff, to our friends? What's your advice in building resilience in individuals?
That's a really challenging question. If I could bottle it, we'd all make a fortune. Well, I certainly would if I could bottle it. And I'd share it with you. I get a little bit tired of people talking about it in a way. It's a bit like talking about leadership all the time. What was the latest leadership book you read? Well, actually you don't get leadership skills, I don't believe, from a book.
No.
Absolutely.
It's from actually experience, and it's hard-won experience where you get the leadership skills. And you're not always right. You make mistakes along the way, and as long as you could acknowledge those, you can move on. If you don't acknowledge them, you just keep repeating them, and you don't move on. So I think resilience, and you're right, Anna, that really they talk about Australia as a lucky country, and in many respects it has and is. But you think not all Australians are lucky. You think the drought that our farmers went through. You think about the bushfires that a lot of our farmers and our communities went through. And now we're hit by a pandemic. I mean, if you're going to break the drought of 25 years of growth, this is not what we would choose to break that with, because we've had three huge waves come and sort of hit us. But I do think there is an underlying optimism in Australia.
Yes.
And maybe it has been because of our history that we've always got through things and been able to move on, and things have improved. So I think that resilience is simply about life. Things happen to you in life. You don't think you can cope. You just put one foot in front of the other, and it's amazing. A couple of months later, a year later, you find you've got through it. And so I don't think it's about teaching people about resilience. I think life
It's about experiencing
is the experience of life that actually gives you the best lessons. I mean, you can talk to people about it, and you can give them coping mechanisms. I mean, at Phoenix Australia, our job is to deal with people who suffer from trauma. So, there's certainly things you can do to help people through trauma that they're going through, and we hope that people reach out for it, because we've got some fantastic services that can help people. But at the end of the day, life is about learning about resilience. And as I say, we can support them through great services that do exist. And you're right, we've got a wonderful safety net in this country that very few other countries have. And so I think the services are there if people need to reach out. We all need help going through certain things. But life is about resilience. You get to my age and you look back and you think, the times where I thought I couldn't get through things, and you actually do, and you go, oh, and then something else will happen.
But do you think also, it's a great point, because we talk about leaders being role models, and you've touched on it, both of you, as well. But it's interesting now how I remember as a kid growing up, and this is just one story. You know, you either won or you lost. There was no difference. You won or you lost.
Yeah.
It wasn't about participating.
Yeah.
You know, that was the journey. Was the participation. The journey was I'm playing because I enjoy it. But there was you won, you lost. We seem to have taken away these opportunities to be resilient, you know, in society today. Is that part of the problem as well, where we give participation? And I'm not saying it's wrong. It's just an interesting concept to explore when you talk about generationally I remember when my kids started playing footy, it was sort of like you can't score. And I'm thinking, every kid on this field knows who's wins and losing. Every parent on the sideline knows who's winning and losing. But you couldn't say, and the first question, because I used to umpire some of the games, and the first question the kids go, who won? Oh, no, it was a draw. I'm like, every kid knows. But even those simple concepts we've seemed to have taken away from the youth. Do you agree? Or
Look, probably to a certain extent I do, because once they actually get into real life and they realise, oh, there are winners and losers.
Yeah.
But I do think this is where inclusion and diversity comes in too.
Yeah.
We need it at a very young age, because
yes,
if you're not invited to compete, if you're not included to compete, then it's not really a competition, is it? So I think we need to have those values very early on. That, you know, everybody is the same, everybody has the ability to participate and engage, and then, you know, then you can have the competition.
I think that's about the great coaches, and when I talk about great coaches, sometimes we assume people are talking about Alistair Clarkson. I still remember some of my junior coaches, like some of the messages that they would give to, you know, under 11s, under 12. So teachers, they're coaches as well, because you're 100% right. Unless you instill those values of inclusion and diversity at a really young age, it's so important, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's also about how you give your message.
Yeah.
If you give your message in a demeaning, negative way, or you give the same sort of, you know, it could be you're not playing the right way, but if you give it in a positive way and point out what's good about it, but you could also do this. I mean, messages, how they're given is so important, how they're delivered. So I think that it's important. So it is about winning and losing, but you can be getting a positive story on both the winning and the losing, if you know what I mean.
I think it's the stories that come out of it. It's the stories that come out of, we talk about all the time. You learn more from losing, providing the message around you've given your best effort and all those sorts of things.
Exactly.
It's really important.
And story earlier around learning from the CEO that walked in, and so you've learnt straight away that I don't like that. I want to be the opposite, and I think we all learn from as much as you say from what we don't like as what we do like, and we pick up traits.
Absolutely right.
It is interesting that this is kind of a topic of conversation in Australia, because again, when I reflect on when I go to Eastern Europe and, you know, very different countries across Eastern Europe, from Russia right through to, let's say, Turkey, people don't talk about this. It is absolutely in sport. It's all about winning and losing. So when I take my son, who is very much into sports, and in here, it is about you either win or you learn. And that's what we've taught him, right? What have you learned from this experience? He goes over there and coaches are actually, no, you've lost because you didn't play well, you didn't focus, you didn't do what I've told you to do. So I think it's comes down to it's cultural as well. But I do think that it is a sign of a sophisticated and advanced society that gives equal opportunity to all. And I think it is important that all kids are given an opportunity to participate, and then eventually, you know, they'll work out.
It's through.
You know, whether I'm talented in this or I'm talented in that. But it's definitely something that is topical in Australia. And when I kind of start talking about it, in other parts of the world, they look at me and say, what are you talking about?
Paul touched on it earlier. Who were some of the role models that you both had as young leaders that you looked up to, and what did you learn from them? What did you admire about them?
It's interesting. As I said, I tend to be an observer about leadership. And I think you're absolutely right. You can learn more about bad leadership, what you don't want to be like, than necessarily good. But look, I think there's a number of people who play a role in your life. And I know we have fancy words for it now. It's mentoring and, it's coaching or whatever. But essentially, in my day, it was taking somebody under your wing and showing them the job, the ropes, and the job. And so I think it's more about people who encourage you and people who encourage you because they believe in you and they believe in you. They're not just saying it. And so you want to, for their sake, push yourself forward. And I think anything where you've given that encouragement from people that you respect. I don't listen to people I don't respect. I don't care what their opinions are. But people I respect, if they give me advice, I listen closely to that advice because I know that they have my best interests at heart. And I think if you can have people in your life that do that, then I think that's one way where you gain confidence. You're willing to try new things. You take risks. I mean, I've worked in the private sector, in global companies. I've worked in small companies. I've worked in the public sector. I've worked in the charity sector. And each one of those was a real challenge because I'd never worked in that sort of sector before. And it was people who I went to see whose views are respected. And I knew they'd tell me the bad news too if they didn't think that the job was for me or whatever. So there are people in my life who have helped me along the way, and that's why I do exactly the same thing. It is pay it forward. And there's nothing better than helping younger people achieve things that they never thought they could achieve. I mean, in a footy team, when you win the game when all the people said you're going to lose that game, and you knew it was because every single one of them played, just at their peak for that period of time.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the great things about
it's
coaching.
exciting. It's exciting.
Seeing other people do well.
Absolutely right. And I think as a leader, as you go further and further up the ladder, for me, self became less and less. It wasn't all about me. It was actually all about my team and the people who were working for me. And that gives you freedom.
Absolutely.
It gives you absolute freedom because you're not really particularly worried about yourself. It's about how you encourage others. And how you achieve and others, helping them achieve their goals. And it's fantastic. You sit back, and you feel like a proud parent when they do a great job.
Anna?
My story is probably a little bit more personal in a sense that the greatest influence on my life was my paternal grandmother. She was born at the end of the World War I in the Balkans, and unlike most women of her era, she was incredibly ambitious and extremely intellectual. And she really, really wanted to know and understand the world around her. She ended up at the Academy of Sciences in Vienna. She was incredibly accomplished as a politician. She joined the partisan resistance against Nazi occupation, and she was virtually on the front in various battles for 5 years. She had 3 children, and when her husband decided that he was of different political ilk than her, she divorced him. And she was one of the first women before World War II in the Balkans to divorce. I mean, that concept didn't exist
absolutely.
in Eastern Europe at that time. So that courage to leave a husband who was very powerful and very wealthy and to take the 3 children and start life all over again, I find that quite extraordinary. In a society that was extremely male dominated as well. I think she always provided a sense of what's possible for me, and my love of books and learning and understanding others' points of view and being able to relate to people regardless of their background or cultural positioning or choice, whatever you want to call it. I feel that I'm a better person for that. The other thing that she instilled with me was, I think, a sense of calm, that regardless of what happens to you in your life, you do need to keep your wits about you, and you need to provide that as an example for your children as well. So understanding that there is always someone to whom you're a role model and to kind of be on your best behavior in terms of that. I mean, she always used to talk about that as well. So, I feel incredibly fortunate that I had that role model in my life.
And you were 12 when you left?
12, yes.
Yeah. So in that, did you catch up with the post coming to Australia?
So they had to migrate as well because of they were in politics and the regime changed in 1989. So they had to live their life. They became refugees in their 70s. So they went from, living a very comfortable and a very privileged life to living in a one-bedroom flat in Richmond. And they brought their books with them, and they still ended up with a large number of friends, and my grandmother was still reading Tolstoy in Latin and talking to me about the fact that I must read Russian literature in Russia to really understand the meaning of the emotions that are being explained. So even that for me was an example of extraordinary resilience because they didn't crumble. They just picked up their lives and looked at how can we contribute, and they ended up supporting a huge number of refugees from the Balkans. I remember, there would be up to 12 people in that one-bedroom flat sleeping on the floor, and, it was like a train station, that place.
Amazing story.
So
it must have been a wonderful reunion when you saw her again.
Yes. So they left a couple of years before I did, and due to a whole lot of terrible things that happened back home, my parents decided to try to get me out of the country as well. Yes, and I was saying before, I was smuggled out of the country, essentially handed over on the border between Serbia and Hungary when I was 12 years old. And, it could have ended up really badly. But again, it ended up really well, and I'm incredibly, I have this incredible sense of gratitude about my life and the opportunities that I've been given.
Yeah, that's amazing, incredible story. We are going through a really tough time at the moment, aren't we? The last sort of 3 months. What have you sort of both learned from that period? But probably more from a leadership point of view, because when we're having these conversations on the Culture Couch, often it always comes back to role models. This role model, and I hope to be a role model. And so, what have you seen? What have you learnt? What's been important in the last sort of 3 months?
I think there's a number of things, and maybe I just talk about personally. I think it's been, for me, an incredibly reflective time. I haven't been running around madly doing the things that I normally do, and I've had to spend time with myself. Gosh, that's been a bit of a shock. No.
But we all have, which is a really good point, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think, it's time for my husband and I to think about what the next stage for our life is. Yeah. And but I've actually quite enjoyed, if one can say that, the shutdown, because it's actually made, I felt like I was just running on a wheel, and now that kind of wheel's stopped, and I was still a bit dizzy, and then I actually had to stop, and I found it quite interesting, just giving me the time to reflect on what my career has been and what I want to do in the future. So in that sense, it's been quite positive. In terms of Phoenix Australia that I chair, and obviously they're in the trauma business, if you like to talk about it. On an organisational sense, our director of the organisation is absolutely outstanding, and his leadership team. Like everybody else, we had to suddenly get people working from home. How do you do that quickly and well? I think because they're in the business of trauma, they understood the trauma with their staff. So if there was anyone living on their own, obviously working from home, they'd always check in with them. They checked in with their staff on a regular basis. So they were looking after their staff, which was fantastic to see. As chair of the board, I made sure that I've sent a couple of emails to all staff to say, the board is with you, we're thinking about you. Here's what your leadership team is doing. We don't have all the answers. If any of you have any ideas, please give us feedback. Let us know. We want to make this organisation successful over this really difficult period of time. Contracts that we were actually delivering, we couldn't deliver the same way as we had before, so we had to pivot and deliver it differently. We lost some so there were financial stresses and strains. So this whole thing, it was exactly what any other organisation really has been dealing with. But I think the organisation has got through it incredibly well because we've had a cohesive message, constant communication, and a fantastic leadership team. And the thing I loved about it was when the director said to me that they've got a senior leadership team and then they've got other leaders throughout the organisation. And he said he was so delighted that so many of the younger leaders were actually stepping up their capability. Yeah. And he said it was wonderful to see because leadership, although, you know, it comes from the top, you've got to encourage leadership throughout an organisation. Otherwise, you know, it just breaks down. It doesn't provide the level of service and the quality of service that you need. So I think as an organisation, we've come together very well. But of course, it's only been 3 months. We've got a long way to go on this, and we're starting to look at new opportunities. We've just landed a major contract from overseas, which we've never gone into that area before. So it's exciting as well in the sense that we're really looking for opportunities probably we wouldn't have been looking for before because we have to. But now that we've actually started doing that, why haven't we done this before? So I think that there's still a long way to go, but in an organisation, I think they've done incredibly well. And I think it's because the key thing is they've been looking after their own people. We can't deliver service to others in the quality we want to unless we've got good people who are there, good team.
And see, again, to give a bit of a personal thing there is I have another amazing role model who is my first cousin, and she's a judge. And she has taught me the power of rational thinking and applying that critical thinking before you do. And what I have actually seen across the small business landscape in Australia and all the customers that sit on our book at NAB is that those that have been able to respond rationally, that have thought through the consequences of changing their business models, those that have adapted and thought through, this isn't something that I need to do for the next week. Potentially, there is another 12 or 18 months that we need to plan for. Those that have planned, adapted business models, gone digital, thought about different ways in which they can service their customers, I think are those that will come out of this crisis potentially even stronger than they were prior to the crisis.
It's almost sort of taking the emotion out, which is hard to do. When it's hard to do when your business is failing or you're losing customers or whatever, you can get really completely caught up in your own head.
We often talk about it, Paul, with professional sport, to stay calm, stay positive, because if you can stay calm and stay positive, you may not win, but you will always get the best outcome. And I loved, you said earlier, the organisations that went in strong will come out stronger. And so often that's about good people, people who care, people who are inclusive, and they're showing the way. So they've already got good systems in place.
It's also about people that are not afraid of change. They're not afraid of testing, learning, iterating, failing, getting up, trying again, who are quite adaptive and not set in their ways. I mean, we've seen that those are the small businesses in particular that are that have a level of resilience that will see them through this crisis.
And I think on that, I mean, as much as we want to see everyone get through, not everyone will, Janine, and your expertise, obviously, with Phoenix is very much that. So obviously take us through what they're doing specifically, but do you have a fear out of this and out of isolation? Because there's so much data around connection and being in the office together and being a team. We've suddenly been separated. Everyone's been out by themselves. Do you have a bit of a fear coming out of this that we're going to go through even greater problems around mental health?
Yes, well, I'm also on a council called Women and Families United by Defence Service, which we must change that name. It's too long. But it's a council of women and families of those who are serving and veterans, set up by the minister to really say we need to take into account not just the serving member, but also their families, because their families actually allow the member to serve. And we haven't done that particularly well in the past. And so what are the things that we need to do to support, families? And of course, going through this particular time, those who are suffering from post-traumatic mental health, having this particular pandemic is not too conducive to supporting them either. So, and their families. So it's additional stress. So, it's really important that we understand, we do the research, and this is where I love working with Phoenix, because they actually do research into what are the best interventions. Yep. And then based on clinical trials, outcomes and data and research, they then have the intervention. So it's not someone coming up and saying, well, I've got a great idea because it makes me feel better and I'm going to set up a company and I'm going out there and doing the training. It's actually training based on clinical evidence. And so what we're finding both in the veteran community where I had this meeting, but also when Phoenix started out 25 years ago, it was simply veterans, but now we've extended to first responders. So it's the fireys, it's the police, it's anyone dealing on the front line. One of the issues certainly we've seen is an increase in domestic violence. That's happened throughout society, doesn't matter what level. And so I think a friend of mine who works for a children's welfare charity was saying that they've had 30% increase in domestic violence notifications, which is enormous. So, I think it's the real issue is that whole heightened level of trauma in a sense. And there are people who will come out of this because they're resilient and will come out of this, in a sense, better than they went in. There are others that this is really going to damage in so many ways. And so we have to be very aware of that. And we have to develop treatments that can really help them in their lives, because the issue is that once somebody suffers from post-traumatic mental health issues, it's not just them, it's bad enough for them, it is across their whole family. And their quality of life just completely declines. And so we need to really lift up those people, give them ways of coping, help them during their darkest time, but with, as I say, clinically tested interventions that really are going to help them. And so it's an exciting time to be in this space, simply because we're doing a lot more research, we're delivering a lot more of our services to support those in the community, and we're learning more. Which is going to make for better interventions as we go forward.
Yeah, and what you're doing is amazing. But I think what football has done really well, and I'll perhaps throw this to you, Anna, is that it's rather than rehabilitating, it's preventing injuries from happening. That's the stage we've got to get to, isn't it? And that's the stage where business and leaders have got to really start to understand before they get to that point. We need to find solutions, and that's around, I hate that term work-life balance, but it's around life balance. It's around how you turn up to work and home the best you possibly can. Do you think the corporates, both of you, think corporates spend enough time on their people? We talk about people, but do we really believe that we'd have to look after our people?
I think that the good corporates absolutely do, and understand that people are the biggest asset that they've got. And in an environment of social media and this accessibility around how things are in, for example, in one bank versus over here, the flight of talent would ensure that you actually have to, for selfish reasons, look after your people. But I do think that this is mixed shift that we are going to see in the new normal and how we work. And the fact that most companies would see this as an opportunity to cut some of those fixed costs and encourage people to work from home on an ongoing basis, I think that will change the fabric of our society. I think we are social beings by nature, and I personally am finding it very difficult working out of my study for the last 3 months, when I'm used to getting the energy out of interactions with other people. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with this longer term as well.
It's funny, they're saying extroverts are really hating this and introverts are loving it. So, but you're right. I think that interaction with people, I mean, I think, early on, everybody got it, and we all just went bang, that's it. And I think we're seeing now is that people say, hang on, it's been 3 months.
Let's
isn't
go.
isn't it over yet? It's like, driving in a car with mum and dad, aren't we there yet? When are we going to get there? And I think that now we're going to start seeing some of those signs because people do love interacting with others and they like going out with friends and they like that social discourse. So although I do think now that we've had such a large number of people working from home, that is going to change the dynamic. Right. And it's a matter of trying to, again, get that balance.
Yeah.
That's right. It's almost like we've shifted too far on the other side.
I agree with that. Murph, you normally like the last word?
I also like to have the last word.
I know you like the last word.
So one of the questions we always like to finish with is, what advice would you give to a younger Janine or a younger Anna? Looking back now, knowing what you know, what would you advise your younger self?
I think to understand how important respect and trust are, trusting yourself, but also trusting other people. If you can't respect people, I think it's impossible to work with them. Not that I didn't have it before, because my family was all about that. And I think because I grew up on that, I just expected that would be the case when I went out in the big wide world, and you find out that maybe it's not the case. So you start to consolidate, I guess, your thoughts about what it is you want to be and how you want to behave. Because you're the only one, you've only got control over one person, and that's yourself. And I think that people do watch you as a potential role model or otherwise. And so I think to be confident, to have respect for others. And I think the important thing is to always have humility, because there's always somebody who is going to be better, bolder, bigger, brighter than you. And there's always people who are going to have better ideas than you. Have the humility to accept that and learn from that. So I think trying to get that right mixture of personal traits is been kind of my life's journey. Sometimes I get it right, sometimes I don't. It's that's life. But at the end of the day, I like to look back and think, I've had a very exciting and interesting career, and that's all anyone can hope for. And I've helped a lot of people along the way, which is even probably the more things I remember.
The whole paid forward notion.
Absolutely.
I think Janine has said it absolutely beautifully. I just finished reading Michelle Obama's Becoming book, which is an excellent memoir. And in it she says, be brave, be seen, be confident, be empowered. And I think that every girl, regardless of her cultural background, should hear to those words.
It's a great way to finish, Murph, I would have thought. I can't top Michelle Obama.
Absolutely inspirational. You've tried, though.
I don't think I'll even try.
No, it's been inspirational. It's fantastic. Fantastic to spend time with you.
Well, I so enjoyed listening to Anna, and what an extraordinary career and life's experience. Absolutely fabulous. And that's the wonderful thing, is everybody's experience is unique. And that's why it's so lovely to sit and talk to people and have the time to sit and talk to people.
That's another thing.
And genuinely, find out about them, ask the questions and find out about them. So thank you very much for the opportunity of listening to Anna.
Thank you, Anna, and thanks, Janine. That was amazing. Great conversation about inclusion, diversity, but leadership, everything. So we really enjoy every culture couch, but this one was pretty special, Murph.
Yeah, it was
great. Always special. It's always good to see you.
Thank you so much.
Very much.
Thanks a lot.
Women Global. Joe, mate of mine, and that's it for the Culture Couch. We'll see you next time.